Two firsts tonight with my testimony. The first time I've had to take off a mask, and the first time I've had to put on glasses to actually read this font. So that's what I'm going to do. I always like to do a survey when I get up here to kind of see who has heard my story and who has not. Who is this? For tonight, this will be the first time you've ever heard me up here. We got a couple of them. All right, very good. For the other of you guys, sorry. Hadn't changed a whole lot, but I don't know whose testimony this is, Frankie, but I'm just going to wing it and read it because, just kidding, it's mine. It's mine. I'm just kidding. All right, we'll just get into it. I've got it down to about 27 pages front and back, so we should be out here by 9 o'clock, no problem. That's a joke. Lighten up, guys. Come on. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I'm celebrating recovery from drug addiction, and I currently struggle with depression and perfectionism, along with a host of other things, and my name is Mason. Hello, family. It is always an honor for me to be able to get up here and share my experience before and after Celebrate Recovery, and over the last almost 8 years. Even though the 12 steps have completely changed my life, I think it's real important that when I'm up here, I have a chance to remember where I came from. And 1 Corinthians 10:12 says, if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. So, once again, my past, it's a part of what got me to this chair today, but it doesn't define me anymore, which is the power of this program. So I was birthed the same year that Star Wars was born from George Lucas's mind in 1977, right outside St. Louis, Missouri. And then very shortly after that, I moved from there to a very small town in north central Arkansas, right before I had started school. My younger sister, the only one that I have, the only sibling, she came along when I was about 4 years old, and when I was about halfway through third grade, we moved from that location to wonderful Fort Smith, Arkansas. I've got early memories. The older I get, the fewer I have. It's kind of a shifting spectrum, and everything that goes this way kind of loses the things from behind, but there are some good ones from growing up. I remember going to Silver Dollar City with the family, a million cousins at Grandma's house for Thanksgiving and Christmas. But, I've always, also, like everybody else, I've got some not-so-great memories, like feeling alone and scared when my parents would fight, or that overwhelming feeling that just somehow I was different from everybody else that was out there. These types of feelings were early catalysts to my soon default setting that was going to be, I need to change the way I feel on the inside with something from the outside. Thankfully, through step work and therapy, I've uncovered some patterns of behavior, and I've got a better understanding today of where that initial desire to change those feelings, where that came from. So when I was growing up, we lived kind of in rural areas, and I always kind of ended up just being with an older friend. When your closest house is 2 miles away, like that's your friend. You don't have much options in the neighborhood there. So, I was always a follower when I was growing up. And then with a summer birthday, it worked out that I was about a year or so younger than the kids that were in my class. There's a big difference between boys at 12 versus 13 or 13 versus 14. There's a lot of development that takes place in that time frame. And so the difference in what I saw in those guys and what I saw in my own physique, it left me really ashamed of my body, and feeling like I was in fear, like I had to prove something all the time. And before I laid this all out and stepped forward and I kind of looked at my part, I would have sat down and told you, and I did tell anybody that would listen until I got here, that all those things that I went through when I was growing up, that's why I'm in rehab today at 35 years old. This has nothing to do with my decisions. It's all those decisions that were made by other people that forced me to make the decisions that I made. Thankfully, I've been able to be with wonderful people. Everyone in this room that has been on this journey with me, my wife, my family, my parents, just everybody have really helped guide me along this trip, and I've been able to realize that, those were my choices. Those were my decisions. I've worked real hard to keep those emotions and those feelings of inferiority in the backpack under the bed and not tied around my back, all the time, every day, and influencing how I react with people that I come into contact with. They still come back sometimes, but recovery keeps me grounded, and I've got people I can reach out to help with that as well. So when I was about 13 years old, my parents' marriage, there were some stresses, and it got too much to work through, and they got divorced. And I remember feeling really weird. I felt really different at that time because I was happy that they split, right? The fighting has stopped. The noises were done, all the pushing around and things that, I had these visions in my mind of what was going on as I'm laying in my bed crying. I can hear it, but I don't know. So, I'm just playing this awful movie in my head, and that was over. And, I lived in constant fear, as a child, but it was always worse, the threat of what was going to happen when Dad got home. That was always worse. Like, it never really was that bad, but just sitting there and stewing in that anxiety, well, that really had a big effect on me. So, after that divorce, I lived with my mom, my sister and I did, and really I wanted to step up and try to be the man of the house. I mean, I wanted my mom to be happy so badly that I really took that to a different level, and I nurtured a nice little codependency, right? Like, I couldn't let her get upset. I had to make sure everything was okay in the house, everything was good with my sister. Like, I could not let her experience anything about life, and so that affected me as well. So where was my faith at this point? Did I have any faith? Really, I didn't have a relationship with God. A relationship is two or more people, interacting with each other. And I felt like I was not someone God really would even want to have as a friend. I had gone to a handful of different, Southern Baptist churches around Fort Smith. But most of my church experience was just, sporadically on holidays and weekend trips when we'd go up to Grandma's house. And the congregation was about 19 people total. And 12 of those had real-life experience of when cars actually were invented. So it was an older congregation. I didn't have a lot in common with those people, right? So I couldn't really fit in and get that community that we strive for around here. And those fire and brimstone sermons, if I looked at those and I thought about what I did in my daily life, I knew I was headed straight to hell just based on the fact that I usually knew what I was doing wasn't the right thing to do, but I just did it anyway. So I planted and started this very fruitful garden of shame that was springing up from every little seedling of thought that I had that I thought God wouldn't like about my behaviors. I was just building this garden. And, the bottom line to me as a young person, I thought God just wanted a robot that never sinned. That's the only highlights of the Bible that I got was you've got to be perfect for God to love you. And I'll tell you what, the scary thing is, you guys all know this, you can get in that book and you can make it say anything you want. You basically can. And so, as you're young and impressionable and you start hearing those things, it's hard to go against that if you don't have somebody in your life guiding you. So I highly recommend, if you've got young people in your life, just make sure they understand that love is what that book is about. It's not about, perfection and doing that, because that was a hard road to walk. So I just saw every time I made a mistake, it was a weakness. It wasn't simply just I was supposed to be a human to make mistakes. And I just spent most of my life just trying to run away and hide from God rather than trying to turn around and repent and do what I thought was the right thing. I'd walk the aisle, and ask Jesus into my heart, but really I just felt more guilt when I left the altar because I didn't feel changed. I didn't feel like it did anything. So once again, what's wrong with me? Why don't I get all the same benefits that everybody else does? After about a year of being divorced, my parents got back together. And I thought that was supposed to be a happy ending. I had friends at school who had divorced parents. They seemed to be saddened by the whole thing. But once again, I wasn't normal here. Here I was mad that the divorce was over. So further, I'm alienating myself from the people around me, and my mind is telling me, you're different, you're different, you're different. You're never going to fit in, you're different. Maybe my story would have been different if I tried to talk about my feelings at that point in time, but instead I just found an easier way out of that feeling, and I started finding ways to change my feelings. I didn't start right off the bat with drugs and alcohol, but it got a lot easier to change them when I found those. That's an instant off switch. If you can't sleep at night because it's going in your head, boom. Have a bunch of drinks and it puts you right to sleep. So that's what I started using. And about 15, I was starting that, but it was only on the weekends because everybody did that, right? Everyone in my family drank. All my friends drank. It really seemed like the people that didn't do it were the minority. This very quickly progressed. And by 17, I was up for anything that I could find to help me feel normal or accepted. And by the time I got to my 20s, I had a very highly developed trinity of obsessive thinking, compulsive acting, and spiritual decay. I couldn't stand to be with myself or by myself, so I just bounced from relationship to relationship, trying to find my soulmate, right? But really all I wanted was somebody that would take care of me, be the adult in the relationship, pay the bills, keep the house clean, make me do responsible things. I wasn't about to do that. I wasn't an adult by any means. So all the way up into 2003, I'm living this lifestyle. I've had more wrecked cars than you can count. I had a great little police record I was growing, a drug-related discharge from the United States Marine Corps, and a compulsion to use anything all day, every day. No friends really to speak with. I was completely isolated. I was 26, I was working with my dad, and I was, riding at the end of another sick relationship, and I took a second job here in Fort Smith because I was already going to school, I was already working full-time, but that wasn't enough to keep me out of the house, as much as I needed it, so I went ahead and took another job so I could never have to go back to that relationship and that environment that I was in, because once again, I don't confront things and deal with them, I just run away. That's a pattern that I've seen in my entire life, just run away. So, my life changed forever. I got paired up with this woman, beautiful, sweet, hardworking, super energetic. She's from California. She had an amazing little 6-month-old son, and pretty quickly we got paired up working banquets. And so at this point in my life, right, I've got this sick relationship I'm in. I've been in several. I'm strung out. I'm exhausted. The last thing that I'm looking for is a relationship. I'm like, all right, this is a very cool person that I've met. I'm going to be friends with her, and that is it. So we got married in 2004, and I took a job in Oklahoma City working for Blue Cross and Blue Shield. And if you guys don't know, it's my lovely wife that I'm talking about over here. We moved to Oklahoma City. Somebody clapping. Jim, stop it. 2004, we moved to Oklahoma City, and when we moved, guys, I felt like a 10-year-old kid. I was trying to play good employee. I was trying to be a daddy, instant daddy, mind you. Daddy, husband. It took more and more chemical assistance to try to numb those feelings of fear and anxiety that were just constant, like just constant. If you guys have dealt with that and you know what it feels like when you wake up in the morning and you have that split second, you've got like a half a second where it's calm and it's cool before you realize like you're back in your life, right? And then it just goes boom, and it just cranks up and you can feel it. Your breath gets shallow, you start getting tightened, you start shaking every single day. It's exhausting. And so after we landed there, in 2005, we were pleasantly surprised that we found out that she was pregnant, and then we were even more surprised to find out that we were not having one baby, we were having two. And at a routine ultrasound appointment, we were told the babies weren't going to wait for the due date, and Ada was actually having contractions right at that very moment. They gave her a diagnosis of preeclampsia, and then that turned into a C-section at just 24 weeks gestation, and the boys were so small that her wedding ring would fit over their hand and onto their wrist with lots of space to go. So if you get a chance to meet her, have her take it off, it's little. So we were there for 204 days over the next 6 months with Caden and Keaton, our little boys. They were born at 1 pound and 1.5 pounds, respectively. I mean, we knew the odds were not in our favor, right? We're talking to all the nurses. We see the people coming in and out. But it was still very devastating for us when we lost the fight with Keaton after 27 days. But with Caden still firmly fighting his fight to come home, we had to press on, right? There's no time to grieve what we just went through. We still got this thing going on. But I'll tell you the truth, guys, if we didn't have that, I wouldn't have grieved, right? Like I was so far into it. I was so far away from any kind of reality that was going on in my life at that moment. I just used that for an excuse for a long time. I said, well, I couldn't process that because look what we had. No, that's baloney. It was my decision. It was my choice. So on Christmas Eve of that year, our son was strong enough to leave the NICU and come home. And this had been our goal, obviously, for 204 days, right? But the next year and a half brought constant state of anxiety as, the monitors were beeped and his lungs would fail. And when you're in the hospital and that goes down, you've got professionals and responders, and they're there like that. They know exactly what to do, and there's a bunch of them. When you're at home and that happens, it's a little bit different, right? I mean, you've seen it time and time again, but when it's you, it's really different. So the anxiety was just cranking up and cranking up. And at this point, our marriage was a little more than just two roommates sharing a place to live. We were definitely not a team trying to face this struggle together. I was gone mentally, physically, and my wife had to shoulder most of that load on her own. In March of 2007, Caden was put back in the hospital battling lung issues again. Spring comes around, we kind of had expected it, and he got better, and they called us and said, go on home and get the nursery ready, because you guys need to come pick him up and take him home. His levels are where they need to be. But just a couple hours later, they called us again. And we knew at this point what that phone call meant, and they said, get back up to the hospital. You need to get here pretty quick. And by the time we got there, he'd already been without sufficient oxygen to the brain for 15 minutes, and we were pretty sure, the little boy that we knew, he was gone and not coming back. So, for the second time in less than a couple of years, we had to make that decision and, hold our son as the machines counted back down, and we lost our second child. If you guys have experienced loss, don't let my ability to stand up here and tell this story with dry cheeks or to add a little bit of levity to this. I don't want you to think that I'm trying to diminish the experience, and by no means am I trying to diminish what you guys have been through. What I would rather you see that as is the power of the 12 steps and the power of sitting in this chair 8 times at this church and probably 20 times across the state and in other states at other churches and telling the same story. And I promise you, the first 15 times, I didn't make it through that part, right? But what that growth and recovery does, what happens now, I cry at other parts of my story. I cry when the happiness comes around. I cry when I realize what joy I've got. Well, I cry when I realize, the forgiveness of my family and those kind of things. So please don't take this the wrong way, because it was a powerful deal, but this is powerful too. Would I have liked for my story not to include what I just told you? Yeah. But I'm not bitter and resentful anymore today that it does, and that's what this is all about right now. So it's very hard to adequately convey how it feels to go from constant therapies and feedings and doctor's appointments and more therapies and the go that a special needs child like that entails to nothing. Just immediately, the very next day, none of that is there. So the emptiness was so consuming, and I really feel like my wife was hit the hardest. The impact on our marriage was difficult to withstand, but you put that together with my addiction just completely out of control, the bankruptcy that we were going to face, the millions of dollars in medical bills that were coming. Statistically, it was very unlikely that we were going to stay together. So this was a turning point for us as a couple, but I think even more profoundly individually this affected us. So thankfully, at that point in time, my wife turned to God, and sadly, I completely gave up. My understanding, remember, from church was, my life circumstances are the culmination of the choices that I've made. I'm being punished for the things that I've done wrong because that's how God works. That's what I was taught. And I knew that my inability to overcome my addiction, that made me someone he wouldn't want to mess with anyway, because I'd time and time again, God, I'm not going to do it again. Foxhole prayers, God, get me out of this. I won't do it again. Those kind of things. And I lied every time. So we packed up and moved back to Fort Smith. And I used to share a lot about the next 5 years. There's some crazy stuff. I don't anymore. It was just safe to say it was a roller coaster of what addiction will do to you. Few ups, lots of very lows. We brought 2 more children into the world with the birth of our daughter Sophie, and then soon after she came soon after we moved back, and then Landon came in 2010. And those of you that share my history, and I don't mean my history of drug abuse, I just mean the history of having that vice that you can't stop, whether it's pornography or food or whatever it is. It's the same cycle in your mind. You understand and you know the crushing guilt and shame cycle that you ride every single day, right? Of the promises, the resolve in the morning, the breaking in the daytime, the promises at night, and then once again, let's rinse and repeat the next day. And you just do this over and over and over again. I didn't want to die. I wasn't going to go kill myself. But there were days when not waking up would have been preferable to the regimen of lying, stealing, and conning I was going to have to do that day just to get the tiniest little bit of fix so I wasn't so sick that I couldn't function. That's a hard life to live for 8 years. So I'd bounced off rock bottom so many times. I was angry and hateful one night, and I remember Ada and I were talking, and I was jealous of her newfound faith. I'm like, how can we both go through this same experience, and you turn to him, and I don't want anything to do with something that's going to do that. And I said, look, this is all great, but what if all this stuff that you're dedicating yourself to, what if it's a lie? What if it's wrong? And she did not skip a beat. She looked me right in the eye and said, if that's true, then I've just lived a life trying to love other people. What's wrong with that? And for the first time in my life, I was speechless. I had no comeback to that. There was nothing that I could say. And it might not sound like it, but deep down, I really did want to believe that God loved. I didn't know if he could love me at that point, but I wanted to believe that was true. But I was so filled for hate for myself and life, I couldn't see that God was working, but he was. And he turned up the pressure just a little bit more on that night. And what happened to me over the next little bit, weeks, days, I don't even know what it was because I was just so out. But it's hard to put into words, but I'll just, safe to say, God broke me in February of 2012. And after that night, I gave up fighting against him, and I surrendered. And I was given a brief reprieve of what it would feel like to literally have no shame and guilt. And I don't know where it came from. I don't know how it happened, but I felt that, and I'd never felt that in my life. I had always felt guilty, and it felt so good. And I felt, this is it. Like, I've got this. I'm done. I turned my life over to Jesus, and I actually attended a few Narcotics Anonymous meetings, but didn't get a sponsor. I didn't get into steps, and it wasn't long. I mean, it was literally like a month and a half, and I was right back in the cycle of where I was. And, Ada and I had talked in February when that happened. If I went back to that state, I had to get to rehab. Like, that's the only other option. We moved to Alma for me to try to get away from my dealers, and that didn't work, right? So I go to Little Rock. On October 25th, 2012, I came to CR in this church for the first time in the back room back there. And that Monday, I left home for Little Rock, and I entered treatment. And I watched my wife drive away, not knowing if I'd ever see her again. And that was rock bottom for me. So years ago, we were studying the book of Esther, and I'm not a biblical scholar, but there are a few things that the wise man says up here sometimes that sticks out. And there's a point in her story, right, where she's going in to speak to the king or somebody, and they're like, if you're not welcomed or received in there, they're going to kill you immediately. But she feels like the job that she has to do is so important that the consequences of death don't matter. She looks him in the face and says, if I die, I die. I have to do this. I translate that a little bit into how I felt in rehab, because when I was down there, about 2 weeks in, and I finally detoxed off all the stuff, didn't do the med, I just did it. Like, I didn't want any drugs or anything. And when I started feeling just a little bit kind of better, that old habit kicked in. It's like, I got to get out of here. Like, I don't know what's going on with my family. I'm in the middle of school. I'm flunking out of college. I've lost my job. Like, I've got to get back to this life that I have, or I'm going to lose everything. And so I sat down on the floor, and I talked to my counselor, and he just told me, he said, look, getting out of here is not special. Everybody's going to leave here. You've got to make sure that when you leave here, you've got the tools that you need to not have to come back here. And that was kind of eye-opening for me, because my whole goal was get out. But not coming back was where I needed to put my focus. And so I was very, very grateful for him for saying that. And they say when the pain is staying the same is greater than the fear of the change, that's when you'll finally make the change. I wish it wasn't that way, but it's very true for me. And I think that I got strength from God, and I took that mindset. I said, if my life, my family, my job, my home, everything I know at this point in my life is gone, then it's gone, and I have to start new. I have to stay here through to the end. And I stayed. And from that day on, I've been working on my recovery, and recovery hopefully has been working on me. So brand new recovery, right? That's awesome. It's a great feeling. And there's hope, and there's energy, and you got freedom from your past. You got reconnection with God and others. And it was great, but it's just not sustainable for me. And life was happening, and there were responsibilities, all those things that I went to treatment to try to get back, my life, my job, all the, family, those things were becoming overwhelming. All the things I prayed for, and now I had them, I'm like, I don't want to mess with those anymore. And so I got distracted. And I started thinking, I can kind of let up a little bit on the things that got me where I am today. Like, I don't have to go to quite so many meetings, right? I don't have to really reach out to that many sponsees. Let the newcomers do that. I've done my time. I've got this. Be careful if you think you're standing firm. And boy, I thought I was standing on concrete, but I really wasn't. I confused material success with internal recovery, and rather than working on myself, every day I'm just looking in the mirror and doing the old finger gun thing, going, you're good, and that was it. As my life got busier, I stopped 10, 11, 12. And those steps that maintain and cultivate the recovery that you build in the first 9, I quit those. And so everything started falling apart and falling back. I felt I didn't need to get sponsees anymore. I took this attitude, and I had back-to-back surgeries. And as a result of that, I relapsed on my pain medication in January of 2017. And I had to come clean with my friends and my family. So at that point, I had lost over 4 years of consecutive clean time, but I don't really feel like I lost my recovery. What is recovery? It's an active change in your ideas and attitudes. And the changes in me that had come as a result of my work since 2012, that's what allowed me to quickly get honest with my family. Like, that's when she came in and I knew in my mind that I had done that, I couldn't look her in the eyes anymore. And the same thing with like Frankie and Ed and you guys, like, be looking at the ground like I can't live that lie anymore. That's recovery, right? That's a change. So I felt guilt. But I think guilt is a good thing. I'm not down with shame. Shame's not there. But guilt lets me know when I'm acting out against my values and principles. As a child of God, I don't have place for shame in my life. Guilt says I did badly, now I need to do better. But shame tricks me and says, you are bad. You'll never be better. And that's not what God's children need to have running through their mind, because the Bible says the complete opposite all the way through it. So I spent way too many years living the lie and feeling like I was a fundamentally bad person. So really, I mean, that's the gist. The last 4 years have been a series of ups and downs. I had a little thing in here where I was going to be like, all right, great, everything's been perfect since then. It's not. Things have not been perfect. 2020 has been a particularly difficult year for me. I've had some things, a couple years ago, I think I came up here and came clean about my depression and really realized that was affecting my life in a major way, right? So I have to focus on that and kind of look at some of the signs of that. And so quarantine hits, right? And on March 18th, I get sent home from work to work from home. And I just went back to the office 3 weeks ago. So I've been working from home from that point on. And I've been a smoker my whole life. It takes me 2 months to get over a chest cold. So I was pretty scared. I didn't want to get out and about. I didn't know from misinformation in the news and the media. I didn't know who to believe. So I basically stayed locked in my house for 3 months. Went out maybe 2 or 3 times. And that's isolation. That's dangerous for somebody like me, because that cuts off my connections and that cuts off my support system. And I did a horrible job of reaching out and trying to stay connected. And before I knew it, I was in a really, really dark place. And then you couple that with the things that are going on in this country right now socially, and I'm realizing that I've had some really messed up views my whole life, and not really even on purpose. And so all this stuff is crashing down on me, and I've got the depression going in, and I've got the anxiety from being scared of the COVID, and then all this the tensions and the protests and all these things, and then I'm realizing these things about myself, that I've had these views that are absolutely unacceptable, and it just got really hard. Nothing happened. I didn't go crazy. I didn't do anything, but I was really close down that road to just kind of saying, well, forget it. All this work is not worth it. I know what's going to make me feel better immediately, and going and reaching out. And thankfully, I didn't do that. But I just wanted to be honest with you guys right now. I ain't back yet. I'm still in a pretty rough place. I'm struggling at work. I'm struggling with my job, with my boss. I'm struggling with the policies there, and that is weighing on me very heavily. So I would just ask you guys, if you know me, if you got my number, I don't do phone calls. I'm sorry. I try to do them. I'll do them if I have to, but a text every now and then, just check in would be cool. That's one of those things, and a lot of you guys have done that. My sponsor does that all the time, and I love him for it. Frankie does that, but I still need a little bit of support getting out of here, because I'm not fully back yet. So I wanted to be honest with you guys about that and just kind of let you know where I'm at. But let me tell you what did work for me and kind of got me to where I was. If you're new here and you haven't gotten into a step study yet, that's the way to go. That's the in-depth roadmap to this program. That's going to get you into all 12 steps and kind of help you learn how to not only read them and do the lesson, but to apply them in your daily life, because that's where the real growth comes, is that consistent application of those principles that you learn in this program, right? That's what we're trying to do, and that's what my goal is. And so it was intimidating for me when I first came, 12 steps. I was trying to figure out what it's going, but I always like to share this because I loved hearing it broken down like this. It's just 4 simple goals in these 12 steps. You've got 1 through 3. I've got to get my dependence off myself in this world and get it back on God and restore that friendship. That's all step 1, 2, 3 is. They break it down. That's all it is. Step 4 through 6, it's time to own my part. I got to admit my wrongs, and I got to find the reason why I acted that way. Got to forgive myself and get right with me. So I've gotten right with God. Now I got to get right with myself. That's the second part. 7 through 9, I ask for God's help. I got to restore the relationships with the people around me and get right with those. So 7, 8, 9, I've got God, I've got me. I'm restoring my family and friends. And then 10, 11, 12 is just keeping it going. That's pretty simple, right? It's not that complicated. If you've got those focuses and those goals, that's what you're after. It's not always easy, but it's very simple. And it's the blueprint for the joy that Jesus says we can have, even in the world as it is right at this moment. And it's pretty messed up right now. But that's the blueprint that we have. I believe that God in this program have helped me accept my past, deal with my current struggles, while helping me still look forward to a reasonably happy future. I don't live a perfect life today, but there is progress, and that's what I'm after. That's what I'll take. If this is your first time here, welcome. We are glad that you're here. Please keep coming back and give this way of life a chance. See what amazing things this program can do, because we need you. The next person that comes through that door scared to death at the prospect of seeing somebody they might know or sharing their struggles with a stranger, they need you to be here. They need to be able to identify with a person that has gone through exactly what you've gone through. And how you turned your life around is a story that they're here to hear. Sometimes the stories that we tell from the stage or in our small groups, it's not just about us. It's about how we can use those stories to touch the people around us. And I encourage anybody that's here, that has been here for some time and has not sat in the hot seat up here, man, make the leap. Because this is another level of openness and just being vulnerable. Like, there's a reason why this is part of this. It's not a look at me now, it's not a showcase hour. This is part of recovery. Get up here and tell your story, because I promise you, don't believe that little voice in your head that says, well, my story's not as good as that person's, or I can't speak like that person, or I don't have anything to share. There's nothing that I've lived through that's going to help anybody else, because that's not true. I promise you that's not true. I've sat up here, I've sat down there, and I've heard stories of sexual abuse, depression, drug and alcohol addiction, addiction to pornography, crippling codependency, just to name a few. Grief, obviously, right? There's something in every single one of those testimonies that I can apply to my program in my life. It doesn't matter if we walk the exact same road. So just turn that voice off and just make the jump. Just make the leap. And I promise you it gets easier every time you do it. The details that we share in our stories may be few. Our stories are unique, but the human experience of trying to get through this life in this broken world, I think that speaks to everyone. I think everybody can identify with that. So, guys, I look forward to sharing a new update with you next time, and I appreciate you letting me share tonight.